Welcome to Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. I'm your host, Laurie Fagen. In this podcast series, I'll interview authors who will then read their mystery, suspense, or thriller short stories or a chapter from their published books. In addition, sprinkled throughout the coming weeks, the podcast will feature radio theater style sections from the audiobooks for my 3 crime fiction novels. Our guest today on the Murder in the Air Mystery Theater podcast is Alex Kenna from the Los Angeles area, not far from Pasadena. In addition to publishing her debut novel, she's also a criminal attorney and a painter. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad we could. Congratulations on your first mystery, What Meets the Eye, selected as a Writer's Bone Best of 2022, and it's a finalist for the Shamus Award for Best First PI Novel.
Thank you so much.
That's terrific. So we're going to talk more about the book and hear Alex read a section in a few minutes. But first, let's go back just a few years. Before law school, you say you were an artist, an art critic, and you sold paintings in a gallery. Tell us about that part of your life.
I was an art and art history major back in college, and I graduated right before the start of the Great Recession. So that caused a bit of a seismic shift in my life plans. But I started out working in a gallery, and I had like 2 good months. I was like in my early 20s. I made all this money. I was selling all this art, and then suddenly, the economy imploded overnight, and that was time for a dramatic reconsideration of things. But I did a lot of freelance art criticism at the time. Didn't make any money, but had a lot of fun doing it. And then did what a lot of unemployed college graduates did and started studying for the LSATs for law school.
I see. Now, on your website, you have a skull that's holding your book and kind of a swoosh on the background. Did you paint those?
I did. Yes. I went through a Technicolor dinosaur skull phase. So I've got a couple of those floating around, but my 2-year-old is scared of them. So I have to kind of keep them out of sight.
I see. Scared now, but soon they will love all things dinosaurs too, but a couple of years from now, probably. So how do you juggle your job as an attorney, a painter, and a writer, and a mom?
Honestly, it's a struggle. I think my house is super messy. I've got my backdrop set up because I can't pull up the camera in any other direction. I get a lot of takeout. A lot of little things get kind of fall by the wayside. But I think I heard someone describe being a working mom recently as, it's not about keeping all the balls in the air. It's more about figuring out which balls are made out of glass and which balls are made out of plastic. And I thought, wow, that describes my life beautifully. So it's mostly just figuring out what can fall by the wayside and, what is something that definitely needs to not collapse.
And one that might bounce a couple times and come back. Right?
Yeah, a lot of lowered expectations for things that don't matter and, trying to separate that what does.
True. So your novel, What Meets the Eye, is about a low-rent PI looking into the apparent suicide of a famous artist. She quickly gets in over her head as the case leads her down a trail of blackmail, art forgery, dirty cops, and the Russian mob. Talk a little bit about your protagonist.
I started writing this book during the pandemic when I think everybody was kind of in a position where their world had completely changed and, their kind of expectations of who you are and what you do all kind of had to get readjusted. So for my protagonist, I really wanted to start with a character who had this kind of seismic shift in her life and how she saw herself. And so she was an LAPD detective and she had a really serious car accident on the job and ended up with serious spinal damage that led to an opioid addiction and lost custody of her kid and things went kind of dark. This is all kind of before the story picks up. And I kind of pick up the story where she's on the mend and she's, kind of kicked her pill habit, but is still kind of struggling and working to try to get her daughter back and is trying to build a new career as a private eye. So that was interesting because I could kind of I have a couple flashbacks to earlier in her life and I could kind of go through her different layers as a character. And It's interesting. I've noticed like online reviews, people either really like her or really don't like her. So, at first I'd be like, oh man, really? But, it is what it is. But yeah, she's kind of doing her best. She's got a flaming case of ADHD, probably because I have a flaming case of ADHD. So I thought that would make her easier to write than, I guess, a quote unquote normal person. And she's, a devoted mother, but has her struggles in that department too. So she was a lot of fun to kind of build and sink my teeth into.
Good. And some good flaws, but hopefully a good character arc as well, to see how she, moves along. Is this a standalone or is it going to be part of a series?
I've submitted the sequel to my publisher. I'm crossing my fingers, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I've got the second one's written. It's a very different book, but a little bit darker, I think. But
I see.
I'm pretty happy with it.
On your website, you say you play string instruments badly. What string instruments would that be?
Yes, and that is not false modesty. I play ukulele badly, and occasionally play guitar or Appalachian dulcimer badly. Mostly, when I had my kid, I had this kind of vision of like, I was always in awe of those like musical families where everybody plays an instrument and they sing together. And I tried to pick up a couple things, learn a couple chords, and to see if I could get my kid interested in it. And then like as soon as he was able to talk, he was like, "No, mommy, no, no singing. Daddy sings." And I'm like, "Okay, fine, kid. Hint taken." Yeah, love music, but I can't say that I am gifted in that regard.
And not for now, anyway. Again, things change, and you just never know. That may come along too. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your writing process, if we could. What's your process like? What is the best time for you to write?
It's been really, really different in between books. So that's been an adjustment. Because, when I wrote my first book, like everybody was telecommuting, nobody did anything. Nobody had a social life. I had a high risk pregnancy, so I couldn't go anywhere because the world was ending and I had a high risk and whatever. So I had, the upside was that I had a ton of time to write. So I could write when I felt like it. It was kind of relaxing. And then, fast forward, I'm back in the office. I have a baby, and the time situation has been very different. So now it's almost like, I don't have the excuse to procrastinate anymore. It's like if I have 45 minutes, then I got to go speed write or, try to go edit a chapter. Or, if my mother-in-law is going to be able to watch my son on a Sunday, I have, then that Sunday is basically going to be writing the book. So it's, left to my own devices. I love writing at night, or I love kind of being in a quirky coffee shop in the afternoon. But these days it's much more of, trying to haul myself up in a quiet room and trying to speed write for 45 minutes when the opportunity presents itself.
No time for writer's block, right? When you got the time, you got to jump in there, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So what's one of the most surprising things you've learned about writing?
I think the part that kind of surprised me most is how it changes the way you read. Which, and I went to art school before this, so it was kind of a similar situation where after a couple years, it's like you kind of go from looking at a painting and thinking that's pretty to like staring at it and trying to figure out how it's made. And there's pluses and minuses to that because, it's enjoyable, but it's also, sometimes you almost lose sight of the whole. And, as I started writing more, I find myself more in that position when I pick up a book. It's less of just kind of enjoying the story and more, sitting here and going, "Oh, good move. Okay. I wonder what's going to happen next. How does he do this?" And then kind of going back and you're almost, you almost start reading to teach yourself and seeking out, writers who are good at, I feel like I sometimes seek out writers who are good at things that I'm less good at and try to like almost study them. So that's been interesting. I feel like I'm in some ways appreciating books in a way that I didn't before. And also in some ways, sometimes I miss that ability to just kind of get lost in a story without kind of trying to figure out how the sausage is made.
That's a good point, though, about reading differently after you're writing, too. So you did talk about you've got your next piece in the series submitted. Are you working on something else at the moment then while that is with your editor?
I have kind of the idea that's forming in my head. So I'm sort of working on it in my head and trying to figure out out how the different pieces are going to fit together. So I have two ideas that I'm pretty excited about. I'm sort of trying to figure out which one of them I want to pursue first and which one of them has the most potential. But I'm getting pretty close to jumping back in.
Good. And that, well, again, will be part of the series then. Is that right?
Yes, that will be part of the series.
Very good. Okay, Alex, please give us a setup for the piece you're going to read from your debut novel, What Meets the Eye.
So I'm going to start with the prologue, and then the first two chapters. My chapters are pretty short. And the prologue is from the perspective of my victim, who is a famous artist and who is very, very dead, and who several close friends have said remind them of me, even though she's a bit of a psychopath. So that's been interesting. So the first two chapters go back to the perspective of my protagonist, to the detective who's trying to solve the murder. So this is a little bit of a slice of both of the main characters in the book. So I will start with the prologue. This is 6 months ago from Margot. All week long, I felt a fire in my belly. The spirit passed through me like lightning, brushes flying from wet canvas to wet canvas. Cooking was a waste of time, so I ordered takeout and drank whiskey. Sleep was out of the question. I cranked up the music and worked to the beat. Sometimes I sang along, dripping globs of color onto the floor. The paint went on smooth like buttery icing. After a while, my brushes stayed in their jar and my fingers danced across the canvas. No bristles between skin and cloth. Soon the images came alive. I'd been studying the Spanish greats, Velázquez, Goya, Zurbarán, Ribera. For then it was all about bottomless darks with hints of warm, mellow light. I took a break from bold colors, indulging in white and yellow ochre on burnt sienna. The effect was sinister but mesmerizing. My hands pulled ghostly figures, one after another, out of a dark void. I finally passed out around dawn on Thursday, just as the birds were starting to chatter. When I woke, it was mid-afternoon and the magic was gone. My mouth tasted of bile, and I felt like someone had scooped out my eyeballs and punched me in the sockets. I wandered into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. One of Goya's haggard witches stared back at me. My skin was the color of rice pudding. There were purple half-moons under my eyes and a cadmium streak in my hair. I picked at my nail beds, which were filled with Prussian blue. The thought of cleaning them was exhausting, so I didn't bother. My stomach let out a growl, and I fumbled over to the fridge. Nothing inside was fresh enough to tempt me. I turned to a soggy takeout container on the kitchen table. The waxed cardboard had partially melted, and a puddle of sauce oozed onto the table. A dead fruit fly was trapped inside the congealed orange liquid like a mosquito in amber. I pulled a half-eaten egg roll off last night's dinner plate and popped it in my mouth. At least it was still crispy. After breakfast, lunch, dinner, I had an edible and downed a pot of coffee. I tried to get back to work, but the electricity was gone. The images that had been so alive last night now looked dull and mannered. A self-portrait smirked at me. I'd given myself a pouty red mouth like an Instagram twat and artificial Jolly Rancher green eyes. It was pathetic, the last desperate cry of a lonely train wreck nearing 40. I felt worthless. I should go jump off a bridge or wander onto the freeway. I lay on the couch for what must have been hours, binge-watching some show about British aristocrats and their servants. Thank God I wasn't born in 19th century England. Can't be a British lady if you're a mouthy alcoholic who screws half the landed gentry. I would have done worse as a servant. I can barely fry an egg, and half the time I'm too paralyzed by my own shit to get out of bed. I'd end up as a consumptive whore blowing sailors for my supper in a London tenement. The curtains were drawn, and eventually light stopped leaking in from the window edges. I usually do better when the sun goes down, but nightfall didn't bring me a second wind. It made me feel worse. I poured myself another drink and lit a cigarette. My cell kept blowing up with a number I didn't recognize. I'd had this phone for 6 months and never transferred my contacts over from the last one. Now my caller ID served as a kind of litmus test. If someone hadn't reached out in half a year, they weren't worth my time. I let it go to voicemail and turned back to the aristocrats. The only decent one was dead now. This show was making me tired. There was a knock on the door. Probably the neighbor coming to tell me her baby couldn't sleep because I make use of my electronics. I ignored it. I took a swig of whiskey and lit another cigarette. Then whoever it was started pounding. "Margot, open up," said a loud tenor. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. His tone had an edge of desperation. Could it be that cop from last week? A wave of dread flowed through me. My hands started shaking, and a clump of ash fell on the couch. If I kept very still, Maybe he'd think I wasn't home and go away. No, the TV was too loud. He knew I was in here. I tiptoed over to the keyhole and gasped. My drink flew from my hand and shattered, coating the floor in alcohol and shards of glass. Now I'm switching to chapter 1, which is from the perspective of Kate, the private detective. This is present day. 7 letters down, a heavenly body. Jupiter, that's an easy one. It even has a double meaning, a planet and a Roman god. Crosswords try to be cute like that. It's one of the many discoveries I've made since the divorce. You pick up a lot when you have long stretches of alone time. Give me another 6 months and I'll have more hobbies than a Jane Austen heroine. The appointment alarm on my phone buzzed with a 15-minute warning. I looked down at the small screen. A new client meeting with some guy named Starling. The name sounded familiar. That was about it. Moments like this, I wish I could afford a secretary. I grabbed the 3 half-filled legal pads at the end of my desk and started flipping through pages of my barely legible scribble. I make up for my lack of organization by being a pack rat. My drawers are filled with half-used notebooks with tidbits from different investigations. When a case gets complicated, I rip out the scrawl and stick it in a folder with the client's name written in Sharpie. It's not exactly the Dewey Decimal System, but after 36 years of flaming ADHD, it's the best I've come up with. And frankly, I'm competent despite my shortcomings. I'm a better-than-average PI. In another life, I was a damn good detective. Relevant note was buried in the 3rd legal pad, below doodles of a sad-looking older man and a girl in a beret hanging from a rope. I draw during client calls to help me focus. Milt Starling, artist's daughter, killed self, but father thinks murder. Now our conversation was starting to come back to me. A loud knock broke the silence. I looked over at the wood and frosted glass door to my office and saw the outline of a stocky male figure. He was early. My hands grabbed for everything in sight, shoving things in drawers to clear desk space. I picked up a cheap red ukulele, another newfound hobby, and slid it under my desk. Normally, I try to clean up before a client meeting, but today it slipped through the cracks. Hopefully, it wouldn't cost me a job. The bills were piling up, and I wasn't going to give John more ammunition by missing a child support payment. I raced towards the shadowy figure on the balls of my feet, trying not to sound like I was running. As I pulled open the door, the man on the other side presented me with a pink, fleshy hand. His skin was warm and coated in a briny sweat. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Starling," I said, "right this way." I gestured towards the clunky antique chair across from my desk. It's a ridiculous piece of furniture that I bought for $30 at an estate sale. When I saw it in the Glendale living room sandwiched between floral lamps, it looked respectable. But when I was unloading it from my car, the leather seat cushion flew up to reveal a ceramic bin. That's when I realized I'd purchased a vintage commode. Now prospective clients sit on a 19th century toilet and tell me their woes. I like to think it's symbolic. Milt Starling held onto each arm of the sturdy seat and lowered himself down with determination. He was not the youngest 60-something I'd ever met. Then again, grief had probably taken its toll. I looked him over, trying to get a sense of his financial status. He wore a blue Hawaiian shirt with yellow pineapples tucked neatly into a pair of khakis. His feet were sensibly clad in white socks and sneakers. The clothes were newish, and what was left of his hair had been mowed to within a half centimeter of his pink scalp. This wasn't a rich man, but he didn't seem to be struggling. He most likely wouldn't be one of the clients who skipped town or tried to pay me with their dead mother's wedding ring. "What can I do for you, Mr. Starling?" I asked. Glanced over at the graveyard of half-finished Coke bottles on top of my file cabinet. I felt my cheeks turn hot and mumbled an excuse about Wednesday being recycling day. Milt cleared his throat and brought his eyes around to meet mine. His breathing was heavy and audible, almost like he was day snoring. I assume you've read the articles?" "Nope, I had read nothing. Bupkis. All I had for preparation was my one-line note and my nasty little doodle." "I want to hear it in your words," I said. "Tell me about your daughter and what brought you in today." I really needed to get my act together. This guy was here to tell me about his dead child, and I was winging it like a lazy amateur. He nodded and coughed into a beefy hand. "The police think she killed herself. I keep telling them Margot wouldn't do that, especially in that horrible way, but they don't listen." "What do you think happened to her?" Milt looked at me with a touch of impatience. I told you, someone killed her. They found her hanging from a chain in her bedroom. I keep telling the police she wasn't suicidal. They didn't even find a note. That didn't mean much. Most suicide victims are too distraught to remember the goodbye letter. The timing doesn't make sense, he continued. She'd been selected for a big exhibit in Italy, so why would she kill herself now? He sounded exasperated, like he'd made this pitch several times before. I had a feeling my door wasn't the first one he'd knocked on. Hanging is not a very feminine way to kill yourself, I offered. Women usually try to look pretty for whoever finds them. Milt nodded. Exactly. Margot liked to look nice. She cared about clothes, that kind of thing. She was a beautiful girl. With effort, he adjusted his weight onto one haunch and straightened the opposite leg to loosen the fabric around his pocket. This was about the time in an interview when a client shows me a picture of their loved one and I supply a generic, "Your husband was so handsome," or "What a great smile," or "She looks happy." He flipped open his wallet and pulled out a photo of a stunning young woman. Black hair, big light eyes, and delicate features. She wore an amethyst-colored dress and a matching necklace. "Wow, Mr. Starling, she looks like a movie star," I said truthfully. She didn't seem like the type of woman who would hang herself. Swallow pills, maybe, but only after doing her hair and makeup. Then again, I knew nothing about Margot, and stereotyping was a great way to wreck an investigation before it got started. Milt nodded again. She was beautiful and talented. None of the other artists could paint like her. "Is there anybody you can think of who might have wanted her dead?" He shook his head. "I've gone over it in my mind every day for months. I can't think of anyone." "Did she have a boyfriend?" Milt grimaced. "She didn't talk much about her love life." I noticed a St. Christopher pendant around his neck, like the one my grandfather used to wear. Maybe the Starlings hadn't approved of their daughter's bohemian lifestyle. He went on. "There were a lot of boyfriends, a serious one in art school. She was seeing her dealer for a while, but I think he was using her, to be honest. Slimy little parasite." This was interesting. If Margot had a drug habit, she could have been involved with some unsavory characters. "Her dealer?" I asked. "Did she?" I must have made a face because he quickly cut me off. "No, not like that. Her art dealer. He sold paintings, not drugs." Milt paused for a moment and stared at his hands. "You know, Margot's mother followed her on the gossip websites. She was always pictured with some businessman or useless party boy. One of them had bleached hair and wore eyeliner." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Did anyone have a grudge against her?" I asked. He shook his head. "Even an argument that seemed minor at the time could turn out to be relevant." "Not that I know of," said Milt, "but we weren't that close anymore. I saw Margot at holidays, and sometimes she called me to chat. When she was younger, we talked about everything. But once she went the art route, she kept it superficial." I nodded and scribbled on my notepad. He wasn't giving me a lot to work with. Surely there was some ex or former business partner with whom she shared bad blood. "Was Margot unhappy?" I asked. Milt shrugged. "She always sounded cheerful when we talked, but I know that world took a toll on her. They expected her to be this free spirit, and she put on a show for people. It must have been tiring after a while." He hadn't really answered the question, and I'd had a feeling he was holding something back. "Did you get the sense that she was depressed?" "Margot was diagnosed as bipolar," said Milt. He spoke these words in the dissociated monotone of a long-suffering parent. I'd heard that voice 1,000 times when I worked family violence. "It's not Billy's fault, officer. He was a sweet boy when he takes his clozapine." "Do you know if she was on medication?" If Margot went off her meds, it could explain why she decided to end things. Milt shook his head again. "She tried, but it flattened her out. Margot said it took away her creativity and her painting got muddy was the word she used. She just dealt with it when she got dark. But she's never tried to kill herself. She wouldn't do that." I had an uneasy feeling. This would be the third case I'd taken from a grieving parent convinced their child wasn't the suicide kind. Each time I confirmed that the victim had taken his own life. Afterwards, both clients called me a hack and left nasty Yelp reviews. This case would probably be more of the same. Margot was a troubled woman who, quote, got dark and refused to take meds. Plus, it sounded like her death was heavily publicized. The LAPD takes media cases very seriously. They would have explored every lead. Reopening the inquiry would just prolong the Starlings' pain without bringing them any closure. Mr. Starling, I need to be honest with you, I said. He winced, and I could tell I wasn't the first person to give him this speech. I've worked suspected suicide cases before, and every time I've confirmed that the police got it right. I'm hesitant to take your money when, in all likelihood, I'd just be duplicating their efforts and wasting your time. Milt let out an exasperated sigh. You're the fourth private investigator I've talked to. Everyone says the same thing. He glanced again at the Coke bottle assemblage on my file cabinet. I get it. I'm used to being the fourth choice. Look, he said, money's no issue. My daughter left us a fortune. But we need to know what happened to her. My wife is still in Ohio. I've spent the last 6 months away from home trying to get answers. If you won't help me, I'll go through the phone book until I find someone who will. If that doesn't work, I'll start knocking on doors myself. He was breathing heavily now. His barrel chest heaved up and down, and his eyes shone. I can't stand it when older men cry. Men like my dad, from a generation where stuffing your emotions was the name of the game. I'll do just about anything to keep it from happening. Okay, I said, regretting at the instant the words left my lips. I'll do what I can to help you. Give me everything you have on your daughter. Chapter 2, Present Day Kate. Milt had little to show for his time in Los Angeles. The file he had handed me consisted of obituaries neatly cut out of newspapers and culture magazines. The articles were organized chronologically. As the months passed, focus shifted away from Margot's death towards the rise in prices for her work. Her paintings were selling for fortunes. People couldn't get enough of them. As I skimmed through the clippings, my phone chimed to life. Reminder, you're picking up Amelia, texted John, my ex-husband. Frap, I'd lost track of time. I must have forgotten to set my go get the kid alarm. Or maybe I'd accidentally turned it off somehow. On my way, I text-lied. John has custody and I'm relegated to every other weekend. When I tell people this, they assume there's something wrong with me. Several parents won't even let their children play at my house. I get it. Better safe than sorry. I overheard a group of moms speculating once. I'm an ex-cop. I must have anger problems. Maybe I even hit Amelia. I just grit my teeth and keep my mouth shut so she doesn't lose any more playdates. Besides, after hearing the real story, no one would let their kid within a mile of me. I stuffed Milt's pile of articles into the giant tote bag I used for a purse and raced out the door. Today I had a rare weekday visit with Amelia, so John could take Kelsey, his replacement wife, out for her birthday. And I was not off to a good start. Even with traffic in my favor, I'd get to the school 15 minutes after the bell. Hopefully Amelia's teacher wouldn't complain to John. I was practically handing him ammunition for court. Deadbeat mom can't even remember to pick up her kid. The teacher recognized me as I drove up to the meeting point. She was holding hands with two stragglers, my daughter and a little red-headed boy with a finger in his belly button. I couldn't help but feel a touch of relief at the sight of the other kid. I was only the second biggest loser parent today. Amelia was sucking her thumb. She looked sulky but adorable. Mrs. McDaniel? Asked the teacher. She looked like a horny dad's fantasy of an elementary school teacher, complete with caramel curls and a blouse with little blue flowers that matched her eyes. I thought of my own colorless ponytail and drab work sweater. To be 25 again. It's Miss Miles, but please call me Kate. I gave her my best attempt at a winning smile. I'm so sorry I had a work emergency. It's fine, Miss Miles, but in the future, pickup is at 3:15, she said with restrained annoyance. We had this issue a few weeks ago. My cheeks burned as I nodded an apology. She was right. Last month, a client melted down in my office after learning that her husband's business trips involved shagging the neighbor at a Motel 6. I had walked the poor woman to her car, forgetting my phone on my desk. When I got back, my pickup Amelia alarm had been blaring for 10 minutes, just enough of a delay for me to hit pre-rush hour traffic. Of course, none of that was the teacher's problem. It won't happen again, I mumbled. I stepped out of the car, leaned down, and gave my daughter a big hug and kiss. The embrace left a lip gloss mark on her cheek. I reached up to wipe it away with my thumb. Let's go, sweetie, I said. She lifted her arms in a signal for me to pick her up. You know Mommy can't do that anymore, I reminded her. Amelia rolled her eyes and climbed into the back seat. I forced myself to smile as I buckled her in. After the car accident, carrying my 55-pound daughter has become basically impossible. I don't think she really understands why, and that's the hardest part. She doesn't get concepts like sciatica and herniated discs. To her, it's just another thing Mommy used to do and doesn't do anymore. The last time I tried to lift her cost me 3 days in bed and an epidural. They weren't trusting me with pills anymore by that point. "Are we going to the treehouse?" asked Amelia. The treehouse is my daughter's descriptive name for my overpriced 650-square-foot shack in Silver Lake. It's tiny, wood-paneled, and you have to climb a half flight of wobbly stairs to get to it, so a treehouse was the first thing that came to her mind. My little girl is used to living in the comfortable 3-bedroom her dad bought in Sherman Oaks. He's been rolling in dough since he left the DA's office and joined a cushy defense firm. It also gave him a wonderful opportunity to meet and marry his summer associate, Kelsey. I would have preferred if he had waited until we were divorced to shag her, but that's another story. "How about pizza, then ice cream, then bowling?" I suggested. When I was a rookie on the force, my training officer used to complain that her ex got to be fun dad while she was stuck holding down the fort. I would nod politely, not really paying attention. Now I get it. When you see your kid only a few days a month, all you can do is show them a good time. Flash forward and I've become fun dad, struggling to maintain some semblance of a relationship with my kid. "I want to play pirates," demanded Amelia. Done. An hour later, we were wearing bandanas and eye patches, eating frozen pizza and watching Johnny Depp cackle at the screen. I even smeared burnt pork on our chins for goatees. Amelia got bored partway through the movie and started picking off her glittery nail polish. She puffed her belly out as far as it would go and balanced a pile of nail polish peelings on top. I'm worried that she's inherited my restlessness and attention problems. Your family condition, as John likes to call it. Kelsey suggested that we medicate her. She's already tired of dealing with Amelia's excess energy and constant messes. I told John he could drug her over my dead body. In a few years, if she's struggling in school, I might reconsider. But for now, we're leaving her 7-year-old brain alone. The glum expression had returned to her face. "Time for dessert?" I asked. Amelia nodded. "Ice cream or shaved ice?" We didn't bother changing into street clothes. LA is full of weirdos, and our pirate get-ups barely stood out. There's a vintage tiki bar and grill a few blocks from my house. The mid-century hideaway is festooned with hula girls, beaded curtains, and a hideous carved idol with rhinestone eyes the size of walnuts. The place is run by Charlie, a grizzled septuagenarian, and Otis, a blue and yellow macaw perched on his shoulder. Amelia is fascinated by Otis, and Charlie dotes on Amelia. I like to think it's because she's unusually cute, but it may be partly because Charlie knows about my custody situation and feels sorry for me. There was a low point when I lost it and started crying into the dragon punch. Charlie and Amelia exchanged semi-toothless grins. "How's it going, princess?" he said with a raspy voice born from a half-century of cigarettes and hard living. The bird was at its usual perch. "Can I feed him peanuts?" asked Amelia. Otis cocked his head to the side, recognizing the name of his favorite delicacy. My daughter tilted her face to mirror the parrot's. "Of course," said Charlie. He reached a trembly hand into his shirt pocket and pulled out several unshelled nuts. Amelia knew the drill. She cupped her hands together like she was going to scoop up a mouthful of water. Charlie poured the bird food into her outstretched palms. "Remember, princess, hold the nut by one long end and keep your fingers as far away from his beak as you can." Amelia gave a little gasp, followed by a giggle as the bird's forceful beak pried away her offering. "Another?" she asked. "Sure, sweetheart, go for it," said Charlie. Like clockwork, she gasped again when the beak snapped forward. As she chuckled, an amazingly handsome bartender left a rainbow concoction in front of Amelia and handed me a Coke. The culinary masterpiece distracting my daughter was a snow cone served in a hollowed-out coconut and topped with condensed milk, an umbrella, and at least 5 maraschino cherries. It's called the Dreamboat, and Charlie invented it for Amelia. She had a look of pure contentment as she eyed the magnificent macaw and spooned cold bites of mango-flavored ice into her mouth. "I don't want her to have too much sugar," I could hear John saying. "He's right, I know it. But Amelia and I have so little time together. I want our visits to feel fun and special, not like a depressing bi-monthly obligation in mom's rundown shack. And it's one night. One night of junk food won't hurt her. She downed her dreamboat in minutes. I paid, and we held hands on the walk home. Amelia insisted that I sing to her, so together we belted out her favorite Taylor Swift song until we were back at the treehouse. My phone beeped. It was John, reminding me to make sure Amelia brushed her teeth. Really, John? We did her nighttime rituals, and I sang more off-key tunes as she passed out in the oversized storage closet that my realtor called a second bedroom. It lacks a window, but it's painted princess pink, and the ceiling is covered with glow-in-the-dark stars. I stroked Amelia's hair as she slept, basking in her presence. She rolled over towards the wall, and I noticed an orange stain on her chin from dessert. Why hadn't I remembered to have her wash her face? After all these years, I was still winging it. I've never been a natural at parenting, even when Amelia was a baby. I was overwhelmed by the physicality of motherhood, holding her fragile little body, supporting her wobbly head, rocking her for hours when her little body went red and rigid from colic. Then there was the terror of trimming her nails without cutting into a tiny fingertip, little digits wriggling like sea anemones. Amelia's pink kitty clock meowed the hour. It was already 11, and I'd been sitting at her bedside for ages. My back screamed in agony as I slowly stood up and made my way back to the living room. There was a scarf and junk jewelry collection on the floor, dirty plates on the kitchen table, and a half-eaten pizza on the counter. The whole place smelled like pepperoni. Just thinking about cleaning made me tired. So I lay down on my couch and started cruising the internet for information about Margot Starling. I scanned her Instagram for angry boyfriends. Instead, I found row after row of her artwork. The paintings were mostly realistic, but her colors were enhanced, almost day-glow. Margot drew her subjects from the dark side of life. There were prisoners in what I recognized as Men's Central Jail, wildfire victims driving an aging station wagon away from a burning ranch house, someone's suit-clad legs walking past a junkie collapsed on a downtown street. I was repulsed, but at the same time unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. And then there was Margot herself, just as lovingly painted and staring at the viewer as blood dripped down her nearly naked body. Yeah, not suicidal at all, Milt, I muttered, shaking my head as I closed the window. This woman clearly had issues. Still, I had to admit, I was intrigued. Then I clicked on an article about the death investigation and saw a familiar name, and my faith in the police workup on her death took a nosedive.
Nicely done. Congratulations. Good job.
Thank you.
That was Alex Kenna reading from her debut novel, What Meets the Eye, from Crooked Lane Books. For more about Alex, you can visit her website at alexkenna.com, Kenna. On Facebook, she's also Alex Kenna, and on Twitter, AlexKenna9. The links are also in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining us today, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me.
And best of luck with your writing, too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
In our AuthorXtra, we feature writer Linda P. Rose from Los Angeles, California, who is a former elementary school teacher turned university faculty administrator, where she has been collecting, quote, ironies, stories, and intrigues from her experiences with faculty, staff, and students for murder mysteries. Her research for historical subplots of her mysteries include an interest in 19th and 20th century Russia and Germany. Her short story, A Later Death, was recently published in Writers and Readers magazine, issue 20, volume 4. Get in touch with Linda at lrose@g.ucla.edu, and the details are in the show notes. Join us next time on episode number 30, when author Betty Webb talks about her latest novel, Lost in Paris, and about her research for this piece that takes place in France, 1922. Then episode number 31 will be the season 2 finale of Murder in the Air Mystery Theater podcast, when I'll read another crime fiction short story. If you're listening on the podcast platform of your choice, please subscribe and leave a review or provide us with feedback. If you're on YouTube at Read Laurie Fagen, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and click on the bell to be notified when a new episode has been released. And for some freebies, check out our Patreon page at Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. For more information, you can visit readlauriefagen.com. Thanks so much for listening, and come back again, where you'll always find Murder in the Air.